Hi, welcome to A Gray Barn Rising. I'm reading the poems this evening of the Greek poet Tákis Sinópoulos, who lived from 1917 to 1981. He's known primarily as one of the leaders of the post-war movement in Greece, and that is post not only World War II, but post-Greek Civil War. He actually was a physician by training and served as a physician in the Greek-Albanian War, and then later did some guerrilla fighting and served during the Greek Civil War following World War II. So I'd like to begin by reading from a little known selection of his work from Wire Press. This was a wonderful publisher, Wire Press, of Greek poetry in translation, formerly edited by Dinos Siotis, the poet Dinos Siotis, and he published many wonderful books of poems, although the distribution was not as wide as it should be. This particular translation is by John Strathatos, and the first poem I'd like to begin with is called The Wild Animals. There is always deep water in your silence where the wild animals come secretly to drink and wash. Tonight there is a fissure, and if you should chance to turn suddenly, a gunshot echoes in the distance and lights up all your face. The hunter's voice is heard. The wild animals flee the night. I think you can tell that some of the psychological ramifications of seeing all the war-torn landscape of Greece and serving in those wars inhabits his poems. The poems are often moved toward a dark place, but they're not necessarily dark and depressing. They're always moving simultaneously toward regenerating that, particularly by simply naming it. He's gaining great power by naming the realities, and that's a step toward regeneration for Sinópoulos. Another poem from this selection called The Window. We bricked the window up. The wind blew from the rubbish dumps. What did we gain? What did we lose? Walking speechless in these incoherent years. There was a room, such barrenness, a lamp hung from the wall, and the light swung face to falsehood. We turned it round towards the time of memory. Just a small river, its name lost in the silence of the sands. We closed the window. The soil outside was restless, and the tree raved at the waxing moon. Heavy with menace, the real moon emerged out of the dream. I love the closing to that poem because in the midst of all this darkness and blockage, Sinópoulos still sees a moment of hope and sees a real moon emerging. Those are poems from the selected poems of Tákis Sinópoulos. I'd like to turn now to a very interesting piece of his. This is in his remarkable book, Landscape of Death, translated by Kaiman Fryer, who's a well-known Greek translator. And this is a very strange poem because I think it serves as part essay too. It's very aphoristic in what it presents in terms of its position regarding poetry. The piece is called The Poetry of Poetry. It's actually a poem, but it has that theoretical component to it as well. It's a longer poem. Each individual section is short, relatively short. I'm just going to pause between sections, and I'm not going to read the entire poem because it's longer. I'm going to read approximately 2/3 of it. And it goes this way. If it lives, if poetry still exists, it is owing to that insignificant, that humble crack the gods forgot in the closed window of man's certainty and his defense. When night fell, his poems reminded me of rooms lit by candles in which words wandered like ancient, absent-minded servant women. I shouted to him that he was naked, and he answered that he was wearing his nakedness over his clothing. When I am struggling with a poem, not a single mirror exists that I may see my own transformation. In speaking so much of hunger, we forgot to protect our bread. In the cupboard now, mice are enjoying terrifying liberties. Sometimes in dreams, words are illuminated by a strange light. Change rhythm and meaning, open like dark flowers, become doors to heaven and the underworld. This man always fought with mountains. Well, he was swallowed up by the potholes outside his door. All his poems were this increasing reality of the body's death amid a dreadful, interlocked relationship with time, degradation, compromise, and triumph. He wanted to add this and that image, to blend together something of the earth's darkness and love's salt. Afterward, he considered that sometimes a poem is better heard between its cracks and what has been erased. In a little while, the poem would be finished. Everything had become clear. The matching rhythms and their order, only there in a stanza, as though something inexpressible darkened and resisted proudly on the threshold of words. It was then I understood that only by such rebellion does a poem stand on its feet. It was a poem, and it was full of holes. Through these you could watch the poet eating, falling in love, taking off his shoes, going to sleep. He wrote all night. Lines leapt from his manuscripts like birds, and murdered poets within him howled, famished, seeking to share in the miracle. He said, "I shall read you this poem." Then, thrusting his hands in a drawer to get his manuscript, he pulled out with difficulty the quiet head of a dead man. Let's be done with words. Knowledge of the river means to be in the river. The first words in the poem shouted with insubordination, as though taking part in a demonstration. The last knelt, lost in the silence and ecstasy. When he had finished, he felt tired, but the poem seemed to him heavy, full of stones. Of course there was a bit of light, a bit of the sky's reverie, voices of the sea, a strange flower. But the stones caused him much difficulty, much more than the snares, the trap doors he had scattered here and there for the hypocrites and the unsuspecting. It's a wild piece about the making and the construction of a poem. I want to read now my favorite Tákis Sinópoulos poem, and I want to read a very special page of this poem. This book, Landscape of Death, was actually suggested to me by my friend John Bradley, the poet John Bradley. He had come upon this book, I believe it was the fall of '83. And he had sent me, he had typed up so lovingly his favorite poem in the book. And you can see this is still in type, and type, not even a Xerox copy of it. And he typed this poem for me, and I read this poem and fell in love with Sinópoulos and ran out and ordered this book. And so even though this poem is in this book, I want to read this cherished copy of this poem because I always keep it tucked inside this book. So this is also in gratitude to John for turning me on to such a wonderful poet. It's called Konstantinos Raving. And this is he has a series, Sinópoulos has a series of poems about Konstantinos and his beloved Ioana. And they actually kind of reverse roles in very interesting ways throughout the series. Inhabit unexpected gender roles. Very interesting how Sinópoulos does that. So here's Konstantinos raving. Ioana is the rain that starts in the sea and proceeds in the night. A mist with roots under the earth. Ioana is a river. She is a cloud behind a voice. She is the smoke of burning grass. She is a moment of ecstasy between two perils. Ioana is a river. Ioana is a window open to the south. She is the children who have left the deserted square. Ioana is a face under the sky. She is a sky under a face. She is a sky under the sky. She is a river. The light of the earth and the darkness sketch her laughter. When the house collapses, Ioana escapes from her body and sings somewhere else in the night. Ioana is a river. Ioana is the day before yesterday. Yesterday, today. Today, repeated to infinity. She is as light as the drowsy head of a flower. She is as heavy as a closed book. She is a continuous declaration of night. With Ioana, you lose yourself and win it again in sleep. Ioana is a river. Ioana is a river bank. She is a reed on a river bank. She is a shadow on the river. She is a river. Ioana is a tree with eyes, a dream with mouth, a sound with ears, a cloud with feet, a river with golden hair whose coolness calms the sea. A river. Ioana is a place we have seen for the last time, a station where someday we shall meet, uttering a cry amid the dust of our journey. Ioana is a frontier constantly altered. She is fluff taken by the wind, a wing within time, a wing in the desolate spring. Ioana is a river. A river. I don't know exactly how to tell you what Ioana is. Wow, I just adore that poem, and it's so precious for me to keep this first copy of it that I ever read, ever encountered Tákis Sinópoulos tucked inside his marvelous book, Landscape of Death. So those are some of the poems of the Greek poet Tákis Sinópoulos. I read from the selected poems from Wire Press and also from Landscape of Death. This book was translated by Kyman Fryer. Thank you so much for joining us, Bootsy and me, for another episode of A Great Barn Rising.